Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hey Jay, how are you today?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. I think you guys just wrapped up the Chuseok holiday, which is, I think, the Mid-Autumn Harvest Festival. Did you guys just have that in Korea?
Yeah. We're recording this.
How was it? Did you have a good one?
Yeah. It's kind of more like a family thing. So people call it Korean Thanksgiving. So it's kind of like an event where you go see family and friends and potentially talk about politics. So that's a thing. So yeah, Korean Thanksgiving. And just coming back.
But it goes on for like 3 days, right? I mean, I can barely handle the American Thanksgiving one day, and it's like, okay, now I got to go on a diet afterwards. But after 3 days of Korean Thanksgiving, it's a lot, man. I mean, you eat and drink and eat and drink. Did you stay locally to where you live, or did you have to commute across the country?
Well, we took my mother-in-law over to Andong. Which is like down in the countryside, and I went to see my granddad up in Yusan, so that was fun.
Okay.
But just like a day trip sort of deal, and we had 6 days off straight this year. So
Nice.
I wouldn't be able to stand being with my extended family for that whole. Yeah,
it's a secret. No, I think that's a common sentiment all around the world. It's funny. I was in Korea back in the day, early 90s, and I had friends that, we all lived in Seoul, but they would have to commute back to Busan or Chollonnamdo, the Cholla South Province, during those big holidays. And back then there was no high-speed train. And if you couldn't get a train ticket or a flight, you'd be in the car for like 16, 17 hours each way.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's gotten better these days.
I'd say it's pretty much the same still. I'm afraid. But yeah, people still do that. That's still a thing. But I actually realized this year, because during the Chuseok holidays, Seoul used to be like completely empty. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
you remember. But
yeah, that was the best place to be.
Yeah, so that's the idea we had, and we tried to go around places in Seoul, and everything was packed. So yeah.
Wow.
So,
okay. So everybody's caught on to the secrets there. Well, hey Jay, I got to say, I'm really excited to talk to you. One of the things that I love about my job and in my role, part of my role at memoQ, is that I get to talk to people from all around the world in the context of these podcasts. I also get to go to a lot of industry events. But I end up most of the time, in fact, with memoQ Talks, all the time talking to people who are in North America or Europe. And it's ironic because I spent a big chunk of my career in Asia, and you, I think, are the first guest from Asia, definitely the first guest from South Korea. So I'm really excited to talk to you and get your perspective in terms of some of the nuances of game localization in Korea, the overall kind of localization environment there versus other places. But before we do that, maybe I can take a step back, and could you just explain, to set the stage briefly, what is NCSoft, and then just talk a little bit about your role, and then I'm going to, hit you up with a bunch of questions.
Okay. NCSoft. I actually wasn't prepared to give an introduction to NCSoft, but it's a game developer within Korea and one of the biggest game developers. So we used to have a saying for a couple of decades, the 3 N's. So that's I won't name the other 2, but there's 3 game developers in Korea whose names start with N's. So that's how you have the 3 N's. And NCSoft really is the one that started the games industry in Korea back in '97 with the release of Lineage. And yeah, it's a real household name in Korea, and recently we've been we specialize in MMO games, like most other big names in Korea, and recently we've been trying to branch out to different products and diversify our portfolio. So yeah, that I think that about sums up NCSoft. And
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being quite humble. I mean, NCSoft is obviously one of the biggest gaming companies globally, and in Korea, as you said, you are definitely one of the powerhouses there. And because of your positioning where you're at, you're doing things a lot of times ahead of what other countries and other gaming companies are doing. So, very, very exciting, dynamic company. Why don't we talk a little bit just about your role so people understand where you're coming from?
all right, so localization engineering, and it's kind of funny you bring up like NCSoft doing things that other companies wouldn't try, because like it's kind of rare within Korean games companies, and I guess I can't speak for overseas, but it's rare to have a localization engineer position. I think in Korea, as far as I know, it's NCSoft and just one other place. Um, so yeah, I am a localization engineer doing engineering stuff for localization at NCSoft, and that usually involves just doing everything related to the localization pipeline we have. So for a game to be translated and shipped overseas, there's like tons of different systems that have to like play a role in the pipeline that we have. And my role in a day-to-day sense is to sort of operate all those systems and make sure they're running well, and just making sure nothing bad happens. And then there's fun stuff as well, like creating systems, like developing stuff that automates workflows. So there's that. And then like what I've been doing more recently is like evaluating potential improvements to our localization workflows. So I'm reviewing new solutions and what have you. And but yeah, we haven't like introduced anything new for the past couple of years yet, because like memoQ's such a great tool and it pretty much does everything for us.
It pretty much does everything. Okay, yeah. I think we can just stop this conversation right now. I'm going to put that out. memoQ does everything. That's awesome.
Yeah, does everything.
Hey, let me ask you because I got into the localization space and we were translating primarily it was financial content, and so the workflows were not that complicated. The focus was on the quality or accuracy of the translation. And then because there's some legal liabilities there, so, and then there was also the security of the workflow. So for example, we oftentimes were not allowed to use freelancers in some remote location because we couldn't control what they would do with that content. And if you have financial information at the right place at the wrong time, certain issues could arise. But the workflows themselves were generally pretty simple. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges in the game localization area versus just other domains.
Yeah, sure. So you brought up security, and InfoSec is a pretty big deal for games companies as well. You brought up finance, and that's I think that's called a restricted sector or something like that. And the regulated space, right? Yeah. And those restrictions, those regulations really do apply to gaming as well, usually. So say we want to bring in a new SaaS tool and talk to our InfoSec about it, they'll ask for a SOC 2 certification and some ISO stuff. I can't remember off the top of my head. So security is always a big concern, and quality, I mean, obviously quality is always going to be important, but you have to think of it from like the certain purchasing. I used to work in purchasing like before like coming to the games industry, and the holy trinity of any kind of service that you purchase is price, delivery, and quality, right? And from the workflow perspective, you are kind of trying to streamline the way people work, and specifically in my case, localization project managers. So whenever we get a batch with a really tight turnaround, like we have to hand it back to the devs in a couple of hours, then they would just be able to press a button, have everything set up in memoQ, and they'd be able to assign the memoQ project on the NC Soft server to a LSP soft vendor, so the LSP can like start working on it right away. And then you kind of have more time to work on the project that way. And then going back to the like quality, price, and delivery thing, you kind of lessen the constraint in delivery, so you have more time to put into quality, right? So it's kind of stuff like that. And workflow wise, and in gaming specifically, I'd say it's a bit different from other industries, definitely. Because what happens in gaming usually, we tend to work with these string table files. So just like giant CSV Excel files, that get extracted from game engines, right? And once it's all like fine and imports well into memoQ because you have filters for that. But once you do the initial round of translations, hand it back to devs, it's not like you get a new file for translation every day. It's the same set of files and iterating over those same set of files. And from my earlier discussions with some of the like memoQ engineering guys, a lot of what we work on are edge cases for memoQ. So for some of the legacy projects we have, a single batch would be tens of thousands of HTML and XML files in several different schemas, and it's a nightmare to set up in memoQ. And then the word count. The word count for a single memoQ project, I've seen it go up to even like millions. So
wow,
yeah, it's kind of like dealing with these edge cases and making sure we can work in memoQ even given these constraints. That's kind of like integral to the work I do, I'd say. And in terms of automation, so I mean, given that we're iterating over the same set of files, right? There's a feature in memoQ I'm pretty sure you know about, like called xtranslate. So instead of doing a fresh import and like pre-translating over translation memory, you just use the old version of the document that lives on the memoQ server and use that as a substitute for the pre-translate. And then you can run a separate pre-translate afterward, but still, it's much faster than pre-translating, and it makes more sense since you have the same set of files, just with iterative updates, so like added strings and changed strings. But in some cases, features like xtranslate are really hard to use without automation through, say, WSAPI, because if you have a batch of say 200 Excel string table files, which is pretty common, then to re-import and xtranslate each one of those, except in some specific cases, you really just have to go into the memoQ client and click on each and every single one of them and re-import and select the new version of the file corresponding to that server document. And that's all automated for us. Like, it's just a one button press. So it's kind of like that I try to like make life easier for people working in localization at NCSoft. And yeah.
I think that's an amazing example because, I mean, seriously, you lost me about 20% of the way in because you're dealing with much more complex workflows than I've ever had to deal with, right? And that's why, I mean, you are a localization engineer. That's what you do, is you figure out these complex workflows, try to automate them, simplify them. And I think that's a great example of what's different from game localization versus just translating regular content. Okay. And you have several good examples there of how a tool can kind of facilitate the automation there. What do you do when you're stuck and you're like, okay, this is something I haven't seen before. How do I figure this out? Do you have an internal team? Do you have colleagues in the industry? Do you reach out to memoQ or some of the other technology providers? What do you do?
Well, it actually used to be that I kind of bashed my head against the wall. Went to Google for it. But
Yeah.
I recently got moved over to a different org that manages developer tools within NCSoft, and I'm still working doing all the localization things I've been doing. So I do have senior developers I can consult now, and then usually for like problems I have, like kind of doing a plug for memoQ again here. But the documentation for memoQ WS API and say even the machine translation SDK, they're pretty thorough. So yeah, they're really good references to have. And if I have a problem like working with the memoQ server, that would be my first stop usually.
So to generalize that, I mean, it's good to have some colleagues or support network you can go to.
Right.
And then if you are going to work with a technology provider, make sure that they have good documentation. Okay. And I'm not just wearing my memoQ hat here. I think it's important for, whatever tool you're looking at or using. It's saved me a couple times. Again, I'm very non-technical, but once in a while I have to get, roll up my sleeves and get in there and figure stuff out. And I just love it when I can just, search the topic and boom, there's the answer. And it makes life so much easier. You deal with, I'm assuming you deal with vendors inside of Korea, outside. Well, obviously, memoQ is a European based company doing business all around the world, but you deal with other companies. Do you notice any differences between localization in Korea versus outside in other countries?
Yeah, there is definitely some differences. So I mean, you lived in Asia for a while, right? And whenever somebody thinks of doing business in Asia, they think of China, and they're like, "Oh, what do they do there?" It's like Guangxi. I'm pretty sure I messed that up, but that's a term referring to
Guangxi.
Yeah, there you go.
Relation.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were speaking Korean or Mandarin, but that's Mandarin for Guangxi. Is like relationships, business relationships, and so on.
Right, exactly. So, like, kind of prioritizing like personal relationships while you're doing business. That's kind of my understanding of it. There is a bit of that going on in Korea as well. But it's kind of been something we've been trying to move away from. So putting that aside for a minute, say in Korea, I'd say, I mean, there's really like two forces at play, as far as it concerns LSPs, I guess. One is, you'd be surprised, like how many, like localization project managers aren't comfortable operating in English, because for translation, it's usually translators who go to like localization project manager roles, right? And what's special about Korea is we're so the Korean language that's included in CJK, right? And for CJK, we do direct translations because it doesn't make sense to do an English pivot. So you have translators who know, say, Korean and Japanese, but they aren't able to operate in English. So it's important, I'd say, for LSPs to have localization project managers on their end who can speak to our guys in Korean. That's usually important. But on the flip side, there's kind of a downside to having your business in Korea, because it's something we struggle with on a daily basis, actually quite a lot. It's called I looked it up before this, and it's called the Fair Transactions in Subcontracting Act. So yeah, so for anyone listening from Korea, it's called 하도급법, and which I'm sure you'll know. And it's kind of a way for the Korean government to protect small and medium-sized enterprises, right? But in effect, what it does in the localization field is it kind of makes it not conducive to have an office in Korea for an LSP, because one of the provisions of the law is like whenever you want, whenever a buyer, so in this case, translation buyers, needs to buy like TFP services from the LSP, they need to issue a written contract before they can ask the LSP to start work. So a written contract in the form of purchase orders or like statement of work. And having to issue a purchase order, a statement of work, it's a ton of red tape. And having to deal with that red tape is time lost for working on translations. So by virtue of you having an office in Korea to better accommodate Korean customers, you're hamstrung by this law in your ability to deliver fast translations. And it has a purpose though. Like, it protects small and medium-sized SMEs. So you always get paid for the work you do. That's kind of rationale behind it. But the flip side is that whenever translation buyers ask, like small-sized LSPs, boutique LSPs to start work, before issuing those official contracts, we'll have the Korean FTC bearing down our necks. So it's kind of like a non-ideal situation. And there is a way to get around it. You just have to scale your business big enough so you have enough assets at headquarters, or your business in Korea is big enough, up to a certain threshold defined by the FTC. But it's still something we have to deal with.
You know, it's interesting because you're right. I spent a fair amount of time in Asia, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and then working in regional roles, covering in mainland China as well. You don't see, for example, in Korea or Japan, and to some degree China, these huge multinationals with massive operations there. Sometimes they'll have production centers. So they'll, if they're getting a lot of Chinese content, for example, or Japanese content, they will have offices there, but they're not typically commercial or sales offices. They're not selling aggressively in the local market. They are working to produce the translation that has been ordered in other places. Typically, there are exceptions. But, for example, in Japan, which is arguably the third largest translation market in the world, with very nice margins. The top company is Honyaku Center, and they do about 100 million a year, which is not much given the size of the market. But my point is, the world's leading LSPs are nowhere even near that. Not even close in terms of their market capture or market share in Japan. And my experience in Korea has been something similar. And I think it's some of these structural blocks. There could be some cultural and business blocks as well. But it's challenging.
Yeah. And I did notice though, like whenever you interview localization project managers who worked abroad, they'll bring up like how many LSPs they used to manage. But I kind of have a feeling that in Korea we tend to lean towards a single vendor approach more often than not.
Gotcha.
So there's that too.
Okay. What can you say about the game industry in Korea, or the leading companies in the industry, in terms of their outlook for markets outside of Korea, in terms of, obviously localizing into more markets and in more languages?
That's actually a very good question, Mark. Because traditionally Korean game developers, we've been making games that were sort of geared for the domestic market. And because of that, we have things set up in such a way that localization groups within game developers, they couldn't have a very high value add because most of the revenue was coming in from Korea. And for the past few years, what I've seen is we are putting more and more resources into creating like new kinds of experiences for Western audiences instead of the usual Chinese, Japanese, or Taiwanese.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's an exciting time to be working in localization, definitely. And since like we're sort of considering global as the next growth opportunity, and you can see it in games like Korean developers are releasing now. There was a recent one from another developer that whose name starts with A, no N, um, that was in the Souls-like genre that was received
Mm-hmm.
very well. And I even played it myself, and it's such a great game. But what was sad to see about that game was it received a lot of criticism for its localization. It had localization that broke immersion, I think one of the reviews said. And then the actual community reviews for it were brutal, at least for the localization. The game was great though. So
It's funny though, because like you're only as good as your localization for that market, right? Because it could be the best product in the world, but if it's not localized appropriately, a lot of audiences will just be,
right. Yeah, I know, and
push back on it.
especially so in the Western markets, because
Mm-hmm.
those audiences are geared towards more narrative-driven gameplay experiences,
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of brings localization into the spotlight more. Whereas the games we've been traditionally developing, they don't like the story element doesn't play as big of a role. Um, so yeah, localization.
So what's it like then to be part of the, localization engineering team at NCSoft? I mean, if you're looking at going into more markets, I would assume that means more workload for you. I would assume, I'm making assumptions here, but I would assume that that it's more work for you and your team. I would assume that you're probably always, recruiting and looking out for excellent talent. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's actually really hard to find people who like to work in a localization engineering position because, like I just said, there's kind of like a chronic low value add associated with the field. So
Mm-hmm.
engineers necessarily wouldn't try to apply. So that's a problem we've been having, and but I will still say there are exciting things ahead, especially with like anywhere you go, like even localization conferences, like everyone's gonna bring up AI eventually,
Mm-hmm.
and there are like stuff we're experimenting with, so R&D within the localization tools group as well, and we're seeing some great results, actually. Like, we're really surprised with the results, and we hope we be able to share them with you soon, though not today. And
Okay.
because the really hard thing about like AI based services is, I can't remember where this quote is from, but it's really easy to make something cool using AI, but making something production grade, that's a whole different question, and we haven't like got to
Sure.
that level yet. um we actually do have a different like NLP group within the company that like already services like AI products, um
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, they're doing all these interesting things with machine translation and like LLMs. Actually, we have a custom LLM model called Varco. So like the NLP
Mm-hmm.
group, they're kind of like the big brains behind the company, I'd say.
Is that a proprietary tool platform, or is this something that you license from another provider in Korea?
So it's not proprietary, because licensing for AI models, that's still a gray area. So I'm not
Mm-hmm.
100% sure if you'd call it proprietary, but it's not an open model either, the LLM model.
Okay.
But you are able to go in the AWS marketplace and spin up an instance and just test it out yourself.
Well, so that was my next question is because I'm here in Bellevue, Washington, which is we've got Microsoft 10 minutes that way and AWS 20 minutes that way.
Mhm.
And so when you look at different AI platforms, those are the two that you see or you hear about the most often.
Right.
I'm wondering, are there any local solutions in Korea that are gaining prominence? Or are Korean companies actually looking outside of Korea for AI and LLM
So most of
solutions?
the POCs we've done, so proof of concepts, they sort of lean towards the open models from the big names, and then
Okay.
GPT too. Still have to test our own model actually. That's something I have to talk to the NLP group about. But yeah, it's mostly the overseas models from like the FANG big companies. But the problem with those models is they don't work very well in Korean. So it's kind of a niche where, and that's a niche that our NLP group is trying to fill actually. So a model that does Korean really well, and it's something other companies in other tech firms in Korea have tried and failed so far. And I think my background isn't in AI in any way. It's linguistics and computer science. But my 2 cents is like Korean's kind of like classified as a medium resource, low resource language. So there's a lot less training data as opposed to something like English, like the Apex languages. So there's that problem. But yeah, I'm still excited to see what comes out of this. We have a bigger model coming for the NLP group in terms of LLM in a couple of months.
I mean, I've been impressed with what Korea has done historically. For example, with search and your whole different kind of online ecosystems that kind of put a wall around Korea in terms of it's not a de facto Google, market, right? I mean, you've got what is it, Naver and
Kakao.
and, yeah, and so it's been impressive because Korea wasn't first to the gate when it came to the web innovation. In fact, I was in Korea in the middle 90s, and a lot of Korean companies were pushing back originally. But then very quickly, within a year and a half, 2 years, they just took the ball and ran with it. And I think by the time, I think it was like 1999, Korea was one of the most wired countries in the world. So it was just like this massive change. And it was also like, oh, they're doing search engines. We're going to do search engines, where other countries, they would be like, oh, we'll just use Google. We'll just use Yahoo. Right. And you guys just, built your whole ecosystem. So very, very impressive. And I'm sure there's going to be some news out of Korea in terms of the AI and LLM solutions at some point. Not sure, but I feel that that's highly likely. Let me ask you, we were talking before about how different localization companies, different game companies, how they treat or respond to geopolitical issues in game loc. For example, what do you call the body of water between Korea and Japan? In Japan, they call it one thing, and Koreans call it something else. And then there's issues like with China and Taiwan, right? And there's issues all around the world. Where are the borders? And if you have a game that has borders and has place names, people's names, there's all kinds of potential issues there. And in some cases, if you don't, you have to make a choice of what you're going to use. And if you make the wrong choice, you may limit your opportunities in a given market. And I thought, how you responded, that you deal with some of those challenges at NCSoft, I thought was quite novel and interesting. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think this came up when we were talking about, so it was in the context of the machine translation service from our NLP group again. So it's a machine translation service that works with in-game chat for our games. So one game that has it applied is Lineage W. And that was necessary at the time because the deal with Lineage W was we were launching in 9 something different markets all over the world. And we were essentially like putting all players on the same server so they could like communicate and compete with each other. But there was always going to be that language barrier. So like it's called NCMT, short for NCSoft Machine Translation. And the rationale behind NCMT is we will have a service that translates chat. That's pretty common. But what we'll have backing that is a custom machine translation model developed from scratch that specializes in translating chat. So it's really good at catching, I don't know what it's called nowadays, but leet speak. It's like in internet slang. And so,
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
And so it's kind of intended for that. But then the geopolitical issues you mentioned kind of came into the equation. And you mentioned Sea of Japan, East Sea. So it's called Sea of Japan in Japan and East Sea in Korea. But maybe a more contentious issue is the piece of rock in the middle of that area. It's called Tokto or Takeshima, and the PC term for it is Lyonko rocks. I didn't know that was a thing. So yeah, it's a question of how do you translate this word, and if you test out public machine translation providers, it's really just all over the place. It's like everyone just kind of doing their own thing. And we had to come up with our NLP group had to come up with a standard for NCMT itself, right? And what they reasoned was, so games are all about, say, player agency, right? So we plop users into a game world, and we need them to feel like they can effect meaningful changes within that world. And a big part of that, when you have a big game like an MMO game where you interact with other people, is sort of just being able to express who you are, right? And by virtue of calling this piece of rock in the East Sea Takeshima, you're kind of trying to convey that you are the kind of person who refers to this rock as Takeshima, right? So it's kind of like the different words for the same thing. So Tokto, Takeshima, Lyonko rocks. So it's a potato issue. And our position is, okay, so you are the kind of person who looks at this thing. It's a potato, and you want to call it potato. And our response to that is, good for you. Like, we respect you for that, and we'll help you do it with machine translation. And it's by no way the right answer, but it's kind of the one we came up with. So,
well, I kind of like it because, like you said, it gives the players agency to express themselves, and it's not a heavy-handed, we're going to do it this way. And you have to admit that issue is very contentious and very emotional for some people. Okay. And it could be very heated. And so some people might say, well, I don't want to play this game because they're not enforcing the fact that it's a Korean rock versus it's a Japanese rock or whatever. Right. And so that could get you potentially into some hot water. But I kind of like the fact that you've kind of democratized it and just said, we're just a game here.
Yeah,
you guys kind of figure it out.
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, speaking of Korea, we have G-Star coming up here pretty soon, which is, I think it's in Busan. And then we're also going to do memoQ Day in Seoul.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about both? Because maybe you could talk about your presence or our presence at G-Star, what it is, why it's important, and then we'll get onto the memoQ Day.
All right. So G-Star. It has nothing to do with the designer genes. It's G-Star. It's a games expo, the biggest games expo in Korea, happens every year in Busan. And last year, the attendance was somewhere around 180,000 people over 4 days. So it is pretty big. And this year, there's a separate B2B section, B2C section, and there's a couple days of conferences on several tracks to go along with it. But for memoQ and NCSoft, so memoQ is going to be doing a booth in the B2B section, as from what I heard from Marine. And NCSoft we're going to have a massive booth in the B2C arena. So I can't divulge details on it just yet, but we're really excited about it, and yeah, hope to see you at G-Star. And
awesome.
Yeah, so, and then memoQ Day Seoul as well. So right before G-Star, the week of G-Star, you guys are going to come over to Korea with some engineers and the Marine Bay, who's the head of sales for Korea, and
who also actually used to run a language service provider in Korea. So she's been in the Loc industry for quite a few years. Yeah, her company did a lot of work for pretty high profile organizations like Kita and Kotra. And then some other foreign government agencies as well. So yeah, she's very, very experienced in localization.
So that kind of explains why she always has everything together. Okay. But,
and then she's just one of these super Korean moms that does everything. So speaking of which, and I'm going to try to make you blush here because I did a little stalking on your LinkedIn profile. And not only are you fluent in Korean and English, but I read that you also have certificates in French and German.
Yeah. That was, I forgot that was up there actually. So yeah, I did French and German for a while. So French, I kind of started out in primary school actually, because I went to primary school in England. And they learn French as the first foreign language. So I kind of learned French then, and German. It was more like college prep.
Well, then you can speak French to Marine as well, because if you guys get tired of speaking English and Korean, she's also speaks French at a very high level. So
all right, I'll try this. I'll try this with the next time. Get back to you with the results.
Excellent.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll have memoQ Day in Seoul. I'll post links to both G-Star and the memoQ Day Seoul information. And if people wanted to reach out and contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Just look me up on LinkedIn. It's Choi. I am probably bound to come up. So if anyone has any questions, my DM box is always open. Might take a while to check, but still.
Awesome. Well, AJ, I really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, you clearly are a subject matter expert and also a regional expert there. So appreciate that. And also appreciate your partnership with memoQ. Wish you and your team, as well as memoQ, a great success at G-Star and at the memoQ Day Seoul.
Yeah, same to you. It was great chatting with you today.
Thank you for being on memoQ Talks. Take care.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.